Today we're going to be talking about animating a character walk cycle. I suggest everybody pick up a copy of the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams, as it's going to be incredibly helpful in this process. We'll be creating a 16 frame walk cycle, meaning that each step will take 16 frames. I'll be animating on twos, which means that there is a new drawing every 2 frames, so altogether it will be 8 drawings per step. If you wanted an extremely smooth frame rate, you could animate on 1s, but personally I think 2s looks just fine. The process for creating these animations will take place in 3 phases. The first being our rough pass, where we're figuring out the poses and the movement. A tie-down phase, where we'll draw in the shapes of the character and any overlapping action. And then we'll clean up our line work and add color. We could add a 4th phase where we composite and add lighting, but we'll be doing that in a future video. Many of you will be aware of the 12 principles of animation, but if you're not, we're going to be using a lot of them today, so I'd highly suggest that you check out this video, The Illusion of Life, before moving on. Although we'll be using all of the principles to some degree, I really want to hone in on 2 of those today, and that will be arcs and spacing. You can imagine the swinging arm in this case like a pendulum. And if you follow any point on the pendulum, you'll find that it follows a curved path as it moves from side to side. If you make the mistake of trying to animate this arm with a straight path, you'll be changing the length of the arm at each frame. The next principle I want to discuss is spacing. You can speed up or slow down an object based upon how far apart you draw them. So in this example, I want the arm to slow down at the end of the swing and speed up in the middle. To achieve this, what I'll do is create more drawings at the extremes and then have fewer drawings in the center of the arc. This gives the arm swing a bit of an acceleration and deceleration. You can see here that it slows down at the ends and then speeds up right in the middle of that swing. So now that we've set up some framework, let's look at the key poses of a walk cycle. The cycle is punctuated by 2 contact poses, where the heel of the foot extends forward and makes contact with the ground. The arms are going to move in opposition to the legs, meaning that when the right leg goes forward, the left arm goes forward. Halfway between these 2 contact poses is our passing pose. This is where the person will bring that back foot forward while their front foot remains in place. We can break these poses down even further by introducing both our down and up positions. For the purpose of our generic walk cycle, we're going to put our down pose immediately after the first contact pose. At this point, the foot has made full contact with the ground. You may even bend the knee a little bit and the head will be at its lowest point. In our up pose, the leg has continued to swing forward and the head will now be at its highest point. If we look at this generic cycle from the Williams text, you can see that he really pushes those down and up poses, which will generally make the animation more lively. I animated my walk cycles in a pose-to-pose fashion, meaning that I started with 2 16-frame contact poses, divided that in half with passing poses, and then divided that in half one more time with my down and up poses. By the time you have each of these 4 poses, they'll all be 4 frames, and then you can fill that in with your in-betweens. So let's have a look at some of the underlying forms for each of these poses. And I'm just going to use the rough mannequin that I discussed in the importance of gesture video. Feel free to be as loose as you want when you do your rough animation, but I'm trying to build out some of the forms so that you guys can see a little bit of the perspective and volume here. I think it always looks good to add a little bit of dimensionality to a pose, so I'm trying to twist the rib cage towards the camera as the pelvis turns away from it. And then in our following contact pose, I'm doing the opposite, where now the pelvis is turned towards the camera and the rib cage is turned away. Again, the passing pose will be halfway between the 2 contact poses, so now the chest will face directly forward and there won't be any twisting between the hips and chest. At this point, the arm will be in line with the body since it's halfway between its swing. If this character wasn't holding a giant sword, his other arm would be swinging as well. And I usually stagger their positions, so the arm that's swinging backwards will be in front of the arm that's swinging forward. And since we're doing pose-to-pose animation, the next pose that we're going to draw is the other passing pose. This time it's the leg closest to us that's swinging forward. Next, we'll move on to the pose that's in between our first contact pose and our passing pose, which will be our down pose. You can see the foot has made full contact in the front and is firmly pressed against the ground. And I'm actually bending that knee a little bit so that it justifies bringing the head level down. Between our passing pose and our following contact is the up pose. Here the leg is now behind the body, and you can accentuate it by having the character stand a little bit up on their tiptoes and their head level go up. I haven't really pushed these too far in terms of the acting, but I think it's a good idea to try to play around with these parameters a lot more and really see what you can do with these poses. Alright, now let's repeat the same poses but in front view. The front view is a little bit harder because the arcs are very foreshortened, but I really like the way that they look. The hip is going to drop down towards the leg that is reaching forward. It's something that I actually didn't push enough in the initial animation, but you can see I'm trying to exaggerate that a little bit more here in the form breakdown. I'll sound like a broken record here, but it's really helpful if you can rotate cylinders in other forms. I have a ton of videos discussing this, so if you're confused about how to rotate cylinders, please just go back to those basic perspective videos. I'm going to skip the second contact pose here and just go directly into the passing pose. The torso is now directly above the leg that was previously reaching forward, so those ellipses are just going straight down. And I flatten the hips, so that way it transitions to the next contact pose where the hips are tilted down to the right. Continuing to work in a pose-to-pose fashion, now we'll go to the down pose, which is in between the contact and passing pose. That form for the hips is now going to drop down. The head level is going to drop as well, and I'm going to bend that knee a little bit more, the knee on the left leg. And now back to the up pose again, where the ball of the hips is going to be further up than it was before. I'm starting to tilt down to the right, and the head level is going to be higher. I'm just going to quickly touch on the contact pose in the 3/4 view, since it's essentially the same idea. You can see me pulling the form of the ribcage towards the camera once again by shifting that center line closer to the left. Having these forms move in opposition to each other gives the pose a little bit more life, and it adds a lot of volume that you don't even need shadow shapes or anything like that for it to feel three-dimensional. I want to briefly touch on the process of this because you might still be lost since animating is super hard. After you finish your rough pass, which honestly doesn't need to be as volumetric as I have here, it could be even more loose and messy. Now the tie down phase, you want to get things on model. You want to try to keep those shapes consistent. You'll notice that pinch in the pants at where the knee meets that leg band. I'm keeping that shape consistent. And the more consistency of shapes you can have between frames, the easier your animation is going to be to look at. And then after I do my pencil tie down, then I'll bring everything to a inked clean line finish which then I'll turn on my onion skin as opposed to flipping back and forth between frames. And then I'll really tighten things down and make sure that the shapes are consistent and that the arcs are reading. Alright, so that's about all I wanted to discuss in this video. There's going to be a follow-up about walk cycles where we're going to introduce a little bit more acting and some variations in the performance. This character animation series will have some videos on run cycles, jumping, martial arts, and then we'll bring this all the way to full choreographed fight scenes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, everybody.